It was a bright morning in Arlington, and the air buzzed with patriotism. Flags rippled in the breeze, media lined the walkways, and families gathered in reverent silence. President Donald J. Trump had come personally to present the nation's highest civilian honor to a group of Marines recognized for an extraordinary mission in the Pacific. The last name on the list was Sergeant Lyla Rivers. As Trump approached the line of decorated Marines, everyone stood tall. Cameras flashed, and a hush settled over the crowd. The president extended his hand in salute to Lyla, but she did not return it. She stood motionless, eyes locked forward, jaw clenched. His hand lingered in the air before he slowly lowered it. A ripple of murmurs spread through the onlookers. Some gasped, while the media captured every second. Tension rolled through the ranks. Colonel Ethan Ward, standing nearby, stepped forward sharply, his expression unreadable. Trump said nothing, neither did Lyla. Everyone expected outrage. A security officer moved in cautiously, unsure, but Trump raised a hand not in command, but to stop them. Then, turning to the crowd, he said, "Let her speak." A microphone was brought forward, but Lyla didn't move. Only after a long pause did she whisper, "Not until the truth is told." The silence deepened. This was no longer about protocol. It was something heavier, emotional, raw, and haunting. 6 years earlier, Lyla Rivers had been a corporal stationed in Kandahar, Afghanistan, alongside her younger brother, Shane, a Marine fresh out of boot camp. They shared more than a foxhole. They shared memories, blood, and a legacy. Their father, also a Marine, had died in Fallujah. For them, the cause was not just duty, it was inheritance. But during one desert mission, everything changed. An ambush, a missed radio call, reinforcements delayed. Shane didn't make it back. Lyla held him as the sun rose behind the dusty hills, and his final words were a mix of confusion and heartbreak. They didn't come. Why didn't they come? She didn't know the truth, but she vowed to find it. When she returned stateside, her formal request for an investigation was met with walls of silence. Classified, they told her. Under review, they claimed. Weeks became months, then years. No answers. Instead, she was promoted, applauded and decorated, but never told what really happened. The mission was buried beneath medals and protocols. Until today, Lyla had kept her silence, but now, standing before the same government that had hidden the truth behind her brother's death, being handed an award felt like betrayal. She looked down at the velvet-lined case holding the Marine Silver Valor Star, an honor most could only dream of. But to her, it wasn't a reward. It was a mask, a gleaming distraction from something darker. As President Trump stood across from her, holding out the medal, she took a steady breath. "I can't accept this," she said, loud and clear. Trump blinked. The crowd froze. "Why?" he asked quietly. Lyla's voice trembled, but she didn't waver. "Because it's being given in place of the truth." The audience stirred. Cameras zoomed in. Trump tilted his head. "Explain." So she did. "My brother died on a mission that went wrong. He called for help. Help never came. I asked why. I begged for the records. All I got were handshakes and medals." Trump turned to an aide. "Get me everything on her mission. Everything." Then he looked at Lyla. "You'll get your answers." Her hands shook slightly. This wasn't what she wanted. Not attention, not confrontation, not a public standoff with her commander-in-chief. All she wanted was justice for Shane, and for the Marines, still questioning if their lives were just pawns in someone else's war. As Lyla stepped back, whispers rippled through the crowd. Veterans exchanged glances. Some nodded in quiet understanding. Others looked stunned. The ceremony was no longer a tribute, it had become a reckoning. The confrontation was over, but now the truth hung in the balance. A female veteran in the crowd wiped a tear from her eye, while a young recruit whispered, "That took guts." President Trump stood silently, processing the weight of the moment. Then, in a move no one expected, he returned to the podium. "This nation does not silence its heroes," he said firmly. "Especially not today." He turned to his military advisor. "Get me Colonel Ward. Bring him up here." Colonel Ethan Ward, Lyla's former commanding officer, stiffened as he was summoned. He marched to the stage, saluted, and stood at attention beside Lyla. "Colonel," Trump said, "you were in charge of Sergeant Rivers' unit. What happened the day her brother died?" Ward's jaw tensed. "With all due respect, Mr. President, that mission is still classified." Trump narrowed his eyes. "Then unclassify it." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Time seemed to pause. "We owe the truth to the families who gave everything," Trump added. Leah didn't move. She had prepared for this moment for years, but she never imagined it would unfold so publicly. By that evening, footage of her refusing the salute had gone viral. Social media exploded with hashtags like #JusticeForShane, #Rivers, and #TruthOverMedals. The very next morning, in a rare executive order, President Trump authorized the temporary declassification of the mission report. The documents arrived at the White House by dawn. As Leah sat alone in a quiet room, the file in her lap, she flipped through its pages and saw her worst fear confirmed. Reinforcements had been available, but they were redirected at the last minute to escort a visiting dignitary to safety. Shane's unit had been deprioritized. Optics had outweighed lives. The report used chilling language: minimal risk, acceptable loss, acceptable. Leah sat in stunned silence. Then the door opened. Trump entered quietly. "I read it too," he said. She didn't look up. "I'm sorry," he added. Slowly, she lifted her eyes, glacier now, but unbroken. "He died thinking no one was coming," she said. And for the first time, Trump had no words. No one had cared until now. Trump nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure no one forgets him." Leah wasn't seeking vengeance. She wanted something deeper: truth, change, and accountability. At a press conference the following day, Trump stood beside her and, shockingly, beside Colonel Ward. Ward stepped up to the microphone, his voice rough and unsteady. "I was ordered to reroute the support," he confessed. "I knew what it meant. I followed the command, but I haven't slept since." Leah's eyes stung not from hate, but from long-awaited truth. "I was a coward," Ward continued, "not because I was afraid to fight, but because I was afraid to speak." The room fell into breathless silence. Then, turning to Leah, he said, "I'm sorry." Tears streamed down her face, not from rage, but from the weight of years of silence finally being lifted. She didn't hug him. She didn't scold him. She simply nodded. Trump returned to the podium. "Heroes deserve the truth, not just medals." And for once, that line wasn't just a soundbite. It was a promise. Back home in Indiana, Leah visited Shane's grave for the first time in 2 years. She knelt beside the headstone, now decorated with fresh flowers left by strangers. A young boy in a scout uniform approached quietly. "Are you the Marine from the video?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Yes. My dad said, your brother saved people," he said. "I want to be brave like him." Her heart swelled. Shane's story wasn't buried anymore. It was inspiring others. She pulled out the medal she had once refused and placed it gently by the grave. "This belongs to you now," she whispered. Suddenly, a group of local Marines arrived in silence. One by one, they saluted Shane's headstone. No speeches, no music, just raw, solemn respect. The media would call it the salute that shook the nation. Talk shows, veteran panels, even late-night hosts debated the moment. Was Leah right? Was her stand defiant or heroic? Most Americans had already answered. They stood with her. Days later, the Pentagon made an announcement. A full audit was launched into past acceptable loss cases, and military families across the country began coming forward with their own long-silenced stories. Some had waited decades for answers. In response, President Trump unveiled a new initiative, Project Valor, a national commission dedicated to investigating mishandled missions and honoring the connolators' sacrifices that had gone unrecognized. It wasn't just symbolic. It marked the beginning of structural change, and it all began with one Marine refusing a salute. Weeks later, Leah received a letter in looping, handwritten script. "Dear Sergeant Rivers, I was with Shane that day. He said, I just wanted to say he was the bravest person I've ever known. I live because of him. Thank you for standing up." Corporal Luis A. Ramirez. Her hands trembled. For years she had carried the weight of not knowing if Shane's death had meant anything beyond heartbreak. Now she did. Days later, Leah found Luis, and they met in person. Their embrace was more than reunion, it was healing. Then Luis handed her something she never expected. Shane's field journal, recovered and kept safe all these years. Inside were raw, honest entries, straining frustrations, inside jokes, hopes of opening a gym back home. But one entry stopped. Her cold: "If anything happens to me, tell Leah I'm proud of her. She's the bravest person I know." She wept for hours, but for the first time it wasn't from grief, it was peace. Invited to speak at a National Veterans Summit in Washington, D.C., Lyla stood before a packed room not just as a Marine, but as a voice. "I didn't set out to defy anyone," she said. "I just wanted the truth for my brother, for your sons, for our sisters and brothers who never made it home." The audience rose in applause before she even finished. Her message was unmistakable. Truth isn't unpatriotic, it's the most patriotic thing we can demand. In a quiet ceremony days later, Trump invited Lyla, her mother, and a folded flag into a private room. He offered her the same medal again, but this time, she accepted it. "Not for me," she said, gently pinning it inside a shadow box beside Shane's photo. "For Shane, for those who didn't get to choose." Trump saluted her. This time, she returned it, eyes full of tears, but standing with dignity. Inside military bases across the country, her story spread like wildfire. Young soldiers began requesting ethics briefings on accountability. Some even asked to be enrolled in what they began calling the Lyla Code. A new clause was quietly added to internal military manuals, an unofficial reference, but a clear directive: prioritized lives over political optics. What had begun as a viral moment had sparked something larger, cultural shift. The brass was paying attention, but more importantly, so were the people. Back home, Lyla sat on the porch with her mother, Grace Rivers. "I didn't want you to be a hero," her mother said softly. "I just wanted you to be safe." Lyla squeezed her hand. "So did I." For the first time, they talked openly about Shane, about grief, and about the silence they had both lived with. They realized bravery doesn't always look like bullets and boots. Sometimes, it looks like standing still when the world expects you to salute. In the town of Richmond, the local elementary school was renamed Shane Rivers Elementary. At the unveiling ceremony, children released red, white, and blue balloons into the sky. Lyla stood among them, smiling through her tears. "He always wanted to teach Jim," she said, laughing gently. "Now he'll inspire generations." An old friend from boot camp called her afterward. "You did what I never could," he said. "You told the truth. I kept quiet too long." More Marines began to speak out, not to condemn the system, but to heal it. One by one, silence gave way to strength. Netflix announced a documentary, titled "The Salute That Shook the Nation." Lyla hesitated at first, unsure about making her story public again. But she said, yes, not for herself, but for Shane, for Luis, and for every unnamed soldier caught between duty and silence. One night, in a dream, Lyla saw Shane. He was standing in a field, no longer wounded, no longer afraid. He smiled and said, "You did it." She woke up crying, but this time, the tears weren't from sorrow, they were from peace. 1 year after the ceremony, Trump visited Shane's grave. There were no cameras, no press, just a quiet moment and a new plaque etched into the headstone: "Truth delivered, sacrifice never forgotten." A wreath lay beside it, signed simply, DJT. 2 years later, Lyla retired from active duty. She now runs a non-profit for military families seeking answers, called Operation Open File. Each month, she receives letters from mothers, brothers, and spouses, letters filled with thanks. And every time she reads one, she whispers the same words: "This was for you, Shane."